Hello, everybody, and welcome to Come Out with Pride's A Seat at the Table. Tonight, we're talking about a cause that is near and dear to my heart, mental health. I know mental health isn't always the coolest topic to talk about, so I really appreciate you coming out today to start this really important conversations. I know we're not going to solve everything, but I'm hoping that by starting conversations, we can destigmatize and normalize conversations surrounding mental health. So I'd like to introduce a powerhouse panel today. I'll first introduce myself. My name is Yasmin Flasterstein. I am a proud Israeli Latinx bisexual, and I'm also the co-founder and executive director of Peer Support Space. And I would like to first introduce a good friend and colleague of mine, Tracy Lutz. Tracy Lutz is a Winter Park native with a bachelor's in psychology from New College of Florida and an MBA from Rollins College. They have 6 years of mental health advocacy, speaking, teaching, and training for groups such as Peer Support Space, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, Mental Health America San Francisco, and the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance of Berkeley. Prior to their work in mental health, Tracy spent over 15 years doing operations, financial, and creative project management. Tracy identifies as a non-binary bisexual and is only recently out. We're so excited to have you, Tracy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Tracy, before I introduce the other panelists, I wanted to ask you briefly, what is one thing you wish people knew about mental health?
Yes, one thing, just one thing. It can steal your dreams, but you still have, you can make it a new opportunity to build new purpose in life that is more fulfilling.
Thank you, Tracy. I really appreciate the realness of that message, that it's difficult, but there's also hope. So thank you so much. I'd next like to introduce Stephanie Preston Hughes. Stephanie is a Florida licensed mental health counselor and clinical supervisor currently in private practice, who specializes in working with LGBTQ plus clients virtually. She has previously worked with college students, domestic violence survivors, and hospice care patients. While employed at UCF, Stephanie served on the transgender care team, presented safe zone educational workshops, and facilitated GLB support groups. She came out as lesbian in 1993, before it was cool, and was president of her college LGBTQ plus student organization. Stephanie was one of the first openly gay graduate residence hall directors at Clemson University in 1996. She remembers what it's like to feel isolated as a gay teenager in a small Midwestern town, and wants young people to know they are not alone. Stephanie is passionate about advocating for marginalized populations as an expression of her Quaker faith. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, Yasmin. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Of course, always love sharing space with you. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Tracy. What is one brief thing you wish people knew about mental health?
Mental health is everybody's responsibility to make happen and create environments where we can be mentally healthy. It's not just mental health professionals, so we all have a role to play.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. There's certainly something we can all do for mental health advocacy, mental illness aside. We all have mental health and we can all play a role in this. So thank you, Stephanie. I am now going to introduce our final panelists. Daniel Anzueto, all pronouns welcomed, is an association management professional with a focus on board and committee development, dedicated to conferences and events for higher education and student affairs. His focus on developing strong connections between board members, volunteers, and staff has driven him to refine his skills in communication, relationship building, and community programming. He has designed and led training related to board communication, committee planning and structure, and equity, inclusion, and social justice and program design. Over the last 10 years, he has volunteered for and sat on the executive committee of Miami Beach Gay Pride, the National LGBTQ Task Force, Winter Party Festival, and the Task Force Gala Miami, Pride Lines, and the Cherry Fund. His focus in his volunteer roles has connected to increased representation of youth minorities within communities and board to funnel growth and access within volunteer organizations for the larger community. Danny is a graduate of Florida International University with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in higher education administration. He is also a safe zone trainer and facilitator, as well as the board president for Maven Leadership Collective. Welcome, Daniel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yasmin. Nice to see everybody.
Awesome to share space with you today. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked everybody else. What is one brief thing you wish people knew about mental health?
It's actually something I learned from you, which I think is exciting. You have to treat mental health like you would treat any other part of physical health. So just like you go to the gym, just like you eat healthy, take care of your mental health, actively work at that, do the mental exercises that you need to ensure that you're happy and healthy in your full body.
Thank you, Daniel. We treat mental health so different than we do physical health when the brain is just another organ of the body. And the same way you can break your arm, sometimes something goes wrong with your brain a little bit. And, you know, we all have life struggles. So we all have mental health. So thank you so much for highlighting that. I'm going to kick us off with our main conversation. I encourage everybody to ask questions in the comments if you have any questions for our awesome panelists today. I also want to name that talking about mental health is really uncomfortable. So I want to welcome myself and our panelists and give us permission to be anxious or be uncomfortable. And we're just going to have an informal combo today. I'm going to ask y'all some questions. Feel free to say, does someone else want to answer this one? If you're really you're just dying to respond to something, even if it wasn't your question, feel free to jump on in. You totally don't need my permission. Does that sound good? Awesome. So I'm going to start with you, Stephanie. We're here to talk about LGBTQ plus mental health, but why? Why do you think it's so important to talk about mental health, particularly for the LGBTQ plus community?
Well, because we have really good data, Yasmin, about health disparities with LGBTQ community. And if we look at the data from the Williams Institute, for example, we see a really increased risk for substance use, for mood disorders like depression, anxiety, and startlingly for me, risk of suicide is incredibly high for LGBTQ, young people in particular. So we need to understand what is it that's going on that's happening. We know a lot, and quite frankly, lack of access to good mental health care, and specifically lack of access to professionals who are practicing really competent care with LGBTQ people can be, a missed opportunity to help those folks. So there's some underlying cause and effect kind of things that we can look at. It's easier to do some prevention things, but there are some unique problems that we face in the LGBTQ community that do require some special attention and focus that are beyond what people outside of the community are experiencing.
Thank you, Stephanie. You brought up a lot of really good points, and those are really just a few of them. So if anybody watching has additional reasons why you think mental health is important to talk about in the LGBTQ plus community, please comment them below. I'm going to move on to you, Tracy. What are some ways that you think mental health is stigmatized? I know you've done so much mental health advocacy work. Why is that work important? How do people view mental health?
Oh boy, stigma is a killer. It's just the simple things like people saying, "Oh, that's so crazy," or "Oh, you must be bipolar," or, "That's so bipolar." It's the appropriation of people's pain. And I know that once I had my diagnosis of bipolar, I had to deal with stigma in workplace, and also just in private life.
Thank you so much, Tracy. There's a quote I really like. It's there's nothing shameful about mental health except the stigma that we place on it. There's a lot of reasons I think we're made to feel like it's something we should be ashamed of. And because of that, we all go through our mental health challenges so isolated and alone, which just makes our mental health worse. And I don't know, that's just the way that it is for some reason. And sometimes that can kind of manifest and we start internalizing some of that. Danny, have you ever experienced self-stigma when you internalize your own shame for mental health struggles?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a big piece, especially as you're starting to explore what mental health means to you. So for me, I think I've lived with anxiety and depression almost my entire life, but I've never really thought about it or engaged with it in any kind of way. And it wasn't until about 2, 3 years ago that I was like, I think I finally need some help. And, I talked to some people, I reached out, and was able to access therapy. And even being in therapy and actively talking about the things that I needed and the skills that I needed and different things, in the back of my head, I was like, why are you in therapy? What is this? Are you, as Tracy shared, are you crazy? Like, what's going on? I think when it came to the point of like getting on medication, it was the same thing. Like every morning when I would take my pills, I would be like, why are you on pills? What is this thing that you're doing? You're not this person. And as I've processed that and I've worked through that in my own mind and through therapy, I've been able to realize it's this stigma. It's this thing that we live with our whole lives and really just don't have a good understanding about. And so definitely an ongoing conversation in the back of my head where I am trying to push some of that internalized stigma away and saying, no, this is good. This is for me. It's healthy. It's something that I need and it's something that I want to do.
Thank you, Danny. I really appreciate that vulnerability as someone who advocates for mental health. I still find myself sometimes wanting to make sure I appear good enough, and not too sick, and really working hard to reframe that, being vulnerable is brave in a world that teaches us that it's not okay to not be okay. Being not okay is an act of bravery. And that's what, it really is impressive. Thank you, Danny. Tracy, I know that in your mental health advocacy work, you've done a lot of self-work yourself. What does it look like when you are unwell? How do we know we're unwell? And when you are unwell, what do you do to take care of yourself?
Basically, every day is a barometer. There's a barometer of, have I taken my meds? Have I eaten decently? Did I go to the gym? Did I do something to, help my mind feel creative today? Did I take care of my pets? Did I clean something? So, that I'm not cluttering. I have what is called a WRAP plan, a Wellness Recovery Action Plan, and it's right here.
You've got receipts.
And basically, I go through a daily maintenance plan, and this is my life. It's my job. It's part of my job. My daily job is to take as good care of myself as I can. I was recently diagnosed with diabetes, and I had to really look at, what I was putting into my body. And so I got rid of flour and sugar and started going to the gym and drinking more water and all those kinds of good things. And it really has, I have made a really good community there as well. I have an affinity for apparently elderly people who work out a lot. So I have a blast every day. I go to the gym and I hang out with my old folks home. And we work out together. It's awesome.
We all have a tribe, and if that's your tribe, I am all for you receiving that support.
That's how I roll.
Yeah. But no, that's wonderful. And thank you for bringing up those different aspects. I think our physical health affects our mental health, and our mental health affects our physical health. So really focusing on this total wellness, whether it's physical, mental health, spiritual health, whatever that looks like for you.
I would like to go into more. You're asking me, what do I look like when I'm unwell? With bipolar, you have depression and you have mania. Mania can look like irritability, or it can look like euphoria, pressured speech, flight of ideas, grandiosity, spending too much, hypersexuality. On the depression side, suicidality, sleeping way too much, just not having much will to live. And luckily, I can ride a really good happy medium most of the time.
Yeah.
Working at it a lot.
And Yasmin, if I can say something, in response to Tracy, I love what you just did, and that, to me, that's modeling being familiar with what goes on for your own self with mental health. When I'm meeting with the client, remembering that's a lot to hear when you're telling someone, I think you meet criteria for bipolar disorder or generalized anxiety, and teaching, what does a diagnosis say? What does that mean? And if you know your own diagnosis, then we can have more success in treating it. I'm in 12-step recovery, so drink and drug free for a number of years, and it's, there's some taboo around some of those things like that. And I think being able to, say, this is what's true for me, this is what I know my triggers are, and the pandemic has been just as difficult for people who work in the helping field as it has been for the rest of us. The joke in our community in mental health is, well, we're sitting like right on the couch with you as you're going through it. Collectively, it's been that time when so many of us are not really sure what kind of advice to give because we're figuring it out ourselves. But to me, that honesty about what's going on with us is that foundation.
Yeah, Yasmin, I think if I can, I appreciate you all sharing this. Sharing what mental health challenges look like for you, I think, is important. So like, even coming into this space, right before we started, I texted Yasmin and I was like, hey, my anxiety is super high. I'm not sure why. It's not about this event. I'm super excited about this. I was like, but for me, anxiety presents itself in either like muffled hearing or like not being able to focus. So I told Yasmin, I was like, if you say my name and I don't respond, just say my name again and I'll snap back into it. And I think some of the pieces that I learned as I processed through and going through therapy, like depression to me looked from I physically can't get out of bed even though I want to, all the way up to I was super high functioning, everything was fine. But then like I looked and I was like, I hadn't cut my nails in a really long time and I couldn't actively type on my laptop. So I was still up, I had showered, I had eaten, I was working, everything was fine. But like this tiny little thing I couldn't do. And I was like, it takes 2 seconds to cut your nails. And I couldn't get my mind to do something like this. So I think as people think about these things, there are symptoms, examples, things that you don't expect. And when you learn about it, you're like, oh, that's a symptom. I had no idea. That's how it reflects for me personally. And it's not going to be the same for everybody. But being able to pick up on some of those things of like, this seems a little off, this experience that I'm having, or how this continues to present itself when I'm feeling X. I think those are really important things for people to understand and start to like mentally keep track of as you're going through your own mental health journey.
Thank you, Danny. You dropped a lot of good gems right there. I wanted to uplift one of them, which was that it looks different for everybody. I appreciate y'all sharing what you look like when you're unwell, because it can help other people that are listening be like, oh yeah, I think that is a sign that I'm unwell, right? And if we can kind of identify what we look like when we're unwell before we're breaking down, because when you're in crisis, like you're not going to be able, it's really difficult, I should say, to help yourself, right? But if we can catch it when we're unwell, that's powerful and that helps us. I know for me, when I'm unwell, it looks like my daily hygiene being really hard to do. It's some days it takes every ounce of energy to get up and brush my teeth and get a glass of water. It is just so hard for me. I know another sign that I'm unwell, I use humor as a coping skill, and I think it's great. But I know there's a line. Sometimes my jokes get really inappropriate, and that tells me I'm experiencing compassion burnout, and I need to maybe take care of myself and take a step back. So thank you all for sharing a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to shift our conversation over a little bit. Stephanie, I have a question for you. LGBTQ plus people experience all sorts of discrimination and harassment. A lot of times it's explicit. It comes in different forms, but sometimes it's these little microaggressions that don't seem like a lot when it's just one time. But sometimes I explain microaggressions as a mosquito bite, where when you have one, it's bothersome, but when you have 50, it's extremely annoying. Could you explain what a microaggression is and how cumulatively those can take a toll on our mental health?
Yeah, I love talking about microaggressions, not experiencing them. And so it's those commonplace everyday interactions that happen, but during them, there's a comment made or a behavior directed towards us that is seemingly subtle on the surface, but it communicates something of othering, right? So an example of microaggression that I experienced, not so much now, but in my younger years, is, "Oh, you're so pretty for a lesbian," right? So, and it's like, I don't know, thank you, or no thanks. I'm not sure how to respond to that. And so what you said, Yasmin, I think is so important. If I have perpetrate a microaggression on a person of color, for example, I can minimize what I'm doing and say, oh, it wasn't that bad. But cumulatively, the effect of a person experiencing that over and over and over. So when I'm tempted to say, it's not that big of a deal, remember the 1,000 mosquito bites or 50 mosquito bites example. Small things can add up.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. It was a really good explanation of it. My next question is for you, Danny. What is, we talked about being unwell. We talked about all of this stigma, all of these problems with mental health. What brings you hope?
People like you. So, Yasmin was part of our Maven Leadership Cohort program, and I have the opportunity to see what the current generation, and that's not age-wise, it's just the people that are here right now, are able to put together, and the work that they're doing and the impact that they have, and me being able to do a little bit about that. I think that's really cool. Knowing that there are so many different people that care about so many different issues and actively want to do something to it. I think having conversations like this brings me hope that it's open and accessible. It's definitely not any kind of conversation that I remember having as a kid, or even really much like through high school and even early college. It took a long time to feel like you could talk about mental health openly, to have a conversation. And the fact that we are now streaming a conversation on mental health gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you, Danny. My next question is for you, Tracy. I see you sporting some really exciting new pronouns next to your name as someone who's known you for a while. So my question for you was, are you ever too old to explore your sexual orientation or gender?
Well, why, thank you for asking this question, Yasmin. It's like you just knew to ask the question. Well, I don't think there's any set age, definitely. I came out when I was 17 in 1986, and I pretty much just came out as a they, them, non-binary, bisexual person in the last few months. And that's because I've seen it modeled really well from people that I'm in support groups with, peer support space people. They have a genderqueer support group. They also have a butterfly talks for LGBTQ women women and transgender people, which is included in the LGBTQ plus. I feel really renewed and in my right space. And will I transition? I don't know. I am working on just getting my body, to be healthy right now. But it also, just opens up options for me. And I feel, there is no age You are free to explore.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's extremely inspiring, and I really appreciate you being brave enough to come out, quite literally, but to talk about your experience with it. So thank you so much, and you're getting some love in the comments about it. But I had another question. You brought up Butterfly Talks. Butterfly Talks is a group that is for underserved populations within the LGBTQ plus community. So for queer women, gender nonconforming individuals, trans individuals, but also individuals that are asexual, that are demisexual, kind of these different, the plus, I guess, in the acronym. Do you guys feel like all identities under the LGBTQ plus umbrella have equal representation within LGBTQ plus spaces?
I'd like to say that bisexuals get the short end of the stick. Bisexual women actually experience more harassment and sexual discrimination than lesbians or straight women. And just from being in the community for 35 years, I've just seen so many bisexual people get a lot of flack from people who want to pigeonhole them. So I'm all about the pluses.
Yeah, as a friendly neighborhood bisexual, I really appreciate you. It made me glad. I just really feel seen. Sometimes I feel like I'm not straight enough for the straight community, but I'm not gay enough for the gay community. And it just really leaves me in this limbo where I just don't feel like I have a group. The reality is that there's actually more bisexual people than gays and lesbians combined, but a lot of people don't know that. And that seems like a weird fact to me because I don't feel like I know a lot of bisexuals, but it's because a lot of people don't openly talk about it because why would they? Every time I say I'm bisexual, somebody is asking for a threesome or if I'm confused or I don't know, whatever it may be. But when I asked that question, Stephanie, you touched your mic. It's like you're about to hit us with some knowledge. Did you have something to add to that?
I think asked, are we all given equal space? And I was going to give a one-word answer, which was no. Next question. I realize that's not what you're looking for, Yasmin. I think this reminds me a little bit about having to lead conversations with white people about their culture and race. And sometimes it's like, well, I don't really have a culture or I don't have a race. Well, you do have a race, right? So, can cisgender people, what happens if we invite them to think about their gender? Well, I'm just cis. So to me, the whole having equal space when we're gathered together, it's not enough just to say we have the space. We have to invite people and lift up certain voices. There's a real risk of people being erased and becoming invisible. I know for bisexual friends who are in a relationship, whatever, they might not be read or seen as the bisexual person they are because of who they're in relationship with. So just a reminder not to make assumptions about people, and that we're all coming in with so much lived history. And even if it seems like there's nothing there, there's something there that we need to look at. Why is it that I came to think I didn't have anything that impacted my sexuality if I'm a straight person? Why did I think that there's something that didn't impact my views on race if I'm a white person? So just that encouragement to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, Yasmin, I'd add, I think the evolution of language is also pretty big on this. So like if you think back historically, like everybody was just gay. Like that was the term, that was what happened. And then the evolution of a lot of gay spaces becoming gay and lesbian spaces, and then bisexual and trans, and the inclusion now, and as you were talking about Butterfly Talks, like the plus. There's more language now that accesses and gives people an understanding of who they are, and kind of what they're feeling. And so like for me, I remember in middle school, I had a friend that came out as bisexual, and I was like, oh, that's what this thing is. I'm like, I'm bisexual. And I had a word for it and I had an understanding for it. And then, in college, I was like, I haven't dated a girl in a very long time. I think it's time to recognize that I'm not bisexual. I'm like, I am gay. And then eventually evolved into queer when I had an understanding of queer and what that language means. So I think as we think of some of these spaces where maybe the data tells us that there aren't as many people, it's because people are discovering the language, and the documentation, the forms, the things that we have hasn't caught up to it. So there's still so many spaces where I looked at a grant report today, and their options for sexual orientation were LGBTQIA plus heterosexual. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. We're just this lump sum thing, and that's when you're collecting data. I was like, cool. So there is more representation. There are many, many more facets of the rainbow out there that are engaging in these spaces and starting to take up space. I just don't think the rest of society has caught up to recognize them in different spaces, and the language that we use and the processes that we have. And I get excited about that as it starts to evolve and we start to see more spaces where what we may see now as underserved is just not represented. They need the space, they need the language, and then they will be there.
That's why I call us the alphabet people.
Yeah, normally I'm team labels are for jars, not people, but I do think it's really important for the LGBTQ plus community because it gives us language and it makes us feel seen. There's a word for what I'm feeling, and it's extremely powerful. And then that word allows you to then find a whole community of people that feel that way, where sometimes people spend their entire lives thinking they're the only ones or they're wrong to feel the way that they do. So I'm going to move us along. This is really good conversation to my next question. Stephanie, I wanted to ask you, I think therapists are wonderful people. They're coming into a helping profession. But sometimes I see therapists where I will ask for an LGBTQ plus therapist, and therapists will kind of comment along the lines of like, I'm cool with gay people. But it's really important to have therapists that really have experience working with LGBTQ plus clients, because sometimes people can do more harm than good. I've walked into my own therapy session where I had to explain, what different codes were, or terms were, or what bisexual really meant and what my community meant. What suggestions do you have for mental health professionals that are working with LGBTQ plus clients? I think you're muted, Fran.
I am muted. Sorry about that. I will not take up the remainder of the hour answering this, although I could. The main thing, Yasmin, that I want other mental health professionals to hear is you're not as affirming and as competent with LGBTQ people as you think you are, but also you can learn, and we need you to learn. In this pandemic, I want to tell you the numbers and stats are not great for anybody to find a therapist who's accepting clients, especially in the LGBTQ community. So we can't just refer to specialists. Everybody has got to get good enough to be in a shared space. We all have that responsibility with our ethical codes. It's not just enough to be nice to gay people, to like gay people, to have a gay friend, to have a trans friend. And it's not enough just to be gay. I have had LGBTQ clients who maybe had an experience with a mental health professional who was part of the community, and it wasn't particularly positive. So I just want to lift up that there's real skills that we have. So if I'm a therapist and I say, I love the trans community, I'm really affirming, and a client comes in to work with you and says, I'm trans, I need to come out to my parents, I'm really strained. And as a therapist, do you know how to support or facilitate difficult conversations, with other family members in kind of a group setting? Do you know what process a transgender person would utilize to access medical treatment, such as hormones? Are you familiar with the specific treatment protocols? So there's a lot of things there are for all of us to learn. I know them really well. It's because I do it every day. But don't let the fact that you don't specialize in it tell you that you don't have a responsibility to keep learning about it.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier of we can all play a role and do something. So to have the responsibility of not advertising yourself as an LGBTQ plus therapist, but also still educating yourself. So thank you. What are some challenges? I mean, we kind of brought up the challenge of not all therapists or all mental health resources being affirming for the LGBTQ plus community. And we see that across the spectrum with physical health care as well. What are some other challenges? This is to anyone that wants to answer. What are some challenges that you see LGBTQ plus folks experience when they're looking for support?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think generally the first barrier is internally, whatever you're dealing with, and deciding that you're comfortable accessing the help that you need, but then just actually accessing it. I think from the time that I made the decision and like shared with people, okay, I'm ready to get help, it probably took me like 6 to 8 months to actually find a therapist. You know, I had really good resources from my insurance that offered, which I was very impressed with, has a dedicated mental health line. So you can talk to a real person and they'll share resources, but they can only work as well as the resources they have access to. And so they gave me lists of therapists to call. And there were so many therapists that I called who never called me back or who weren't taking new patients, even though their website said they were taking new patients. And so all of those, I think, are like huge barriers as we have to think about how you access the spaces. And then I think to Stephanie's point of the things that the therapist needs to know, as someone seeking mental health support, you also have to know, like, you don't have to settle. That was a really big thing for me when I went to my first therapy session, and I was kind of like, yeah, I guess this is okay. And we had an okay conversation. I didn't feel any kind of connection to the therapist. I didn't really feel any better about the conversation by the end of it. And I talked to somebody who had gone to therapy and is one of my role models and like how they access the spaces. And they're like, don't settle. They're like, it's like dating, like find someone until you're happy and then go there. And I was like, oh, I don't have to stay here. Okay, cool. That makes me feel good.
Thank you, Danny. It's a personal pet peeve of mine when people reach out for help and aren't responded to. It is so scary reaching out for help for your mental health, and it takes a lot. So it sucks that sometimes it's really hard to navigate our system, and it's why it's so important that you're met with affirming resources, because you might not reach out again when you have a bad experience and just kind of mark it off as like, oh, this isn't for me.
Yeah.
And I wanted to highlight a comment in the sections. There's a lot of really good comments. Thank you so much, everybody. And I see a lot of you sharing your personal experience, and I really, really appreciate that. Dandelion shared too that recognizing that therapists aren't necessarily the catch-all solution. And I wanted to uplift that comment because there's so many ways that we can all heal. And for some people, that's therapy. For some people, that's medication. And I think those are the two people most often think about. And I'm not downing either of those because they both help me a lot and I have used both of them. But if it is peer services, if it is crystal healing, if it is expressive art, if it is working out, if it is diving into new hobbies, you know, finding what works for you or what combination works for you is really important. I'm going to take a very hard left turn and bring up one other approach for help. It's conversion therapy. Stephanie, what are your thoughts on this?
Uh-oh, Yasmin, don't get me started. You know, and I get somber because I feel myself getting impacted by this conversation. Conversion therapy is our efforts to change a person's sexual orientation or a gender identity. It is still going on in the United States. It's still happening in Florida. It is not illegal or banned. It is in some states, but we still have a number more to go. Historically, it's been religious organizations, particular Christian organizations, who have interpreted their scripture in a particular way, and so used that scripture as justification for trying to say, you can't be gay, let's change you. What we know scientifically is it doesn't work. In fact, it causes great great harm and detriment. It's an area that I specialize in. I have a number of clients who've experienced what I call religious trauma from conversion therapy. And so we're having to kind of undo all the shame they experience from being told you're not okay, you need to fix who you are, you're broken. And then from there, kind of get to the basic root stuff that's just beyond the undoing the harm that was done. So we can do a lot of significant hurt. I cannot overstate that enough. So if you're not clear what you're doing, or if you're not clear if a question is a good question, please seek peer consultation. Please read about this. There's so many great resources. Trevor Project, I know, Trans Lifeline. There's so many things that offer, resources to teach and educate about this.
Thank you, Stephanie. And it wasn't that long ago, conversion therapy was totally legal here in Orlando. And I know there's a lot of Central Florida advocates that really advocated for the ban of therapy. So thank you so much to those folks. And I normally don't take hard opinions, but it's a hard no for conversion therapy on me. It's definitely harmful and not okay. So I wanted to move our conversation, and this question is for anyone also. We all have many identities that intersect with one another. Why is it important not just to talk about mental health, but to talk about LGBTQ plus mental health, to talk about Black LGBTQ plus mental health, to talk about immigrant LGBTQ plus mental health? Why is it important to talk about these intersecting identities?
Stigma looks different in every different community.
Mm-hmm.
In the Black community and other Black and brown communities, there's a great deal of stigma.
Yeah, I'd say the added layers that you experience when you put on your sexual orientation, your gender expression, your racial identity. You have to unpack all of that and you have to work through it. And so I think a lot of the things that helped me back is like the machismo that's experienced in a lot of the Latinx communities, and being like, no, you're like a man and you should be fine. And, boys don't cry, and all of these things that you grow up hearing that are additional barriers as you try. If you're just looking to just have conversations with people, like there are all of these things that are there. And so I think it's important to understand how intersectionality plays a role within you as you look for mental health, as well as externally as you enter spaces for support.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking from a humility perspective, I love the idea of cultural humility instead of cultural competence. I want to learn as much as I can, genuinely, like Stephanie really wants to learn as much as she can, but also I don't have time to read all of the things and learn all of the things. So if I can approach these things as true curiosity and dialogue and being open and asking people, to share, inviting those voices and just listening an awful lot. For me, as a white LGBTQ person, feels like my work. I love in Orlando and Central Florida what we did during the pandemic in 2020, the LGBTQ Relief Fund. And so, making efforts to really focus that giving towards especially impacted communities, our, Black communities, Latinx communities here in Orlando. And when we focus on those who have the most kind of unaddressed needs, if we help those, we're helping everybody in the whole community. That's the thing. And I can't help a client I'm working with navigate, some of the rules of being gay and Black culture if I don't know that those things exist. So I have to just acknowledge there's a lot that I don't know, and just be willing to go there with people.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. I think it's really important that we check our privilege for many things, not just our race, because when you're at the intersection of multiple identities that are historically oppressed, you're experiencing discrimination, harassment, even if it's just microaggressions from many different directions, and that's hard. And, you know, to Danny's point earlier, where like more and more people are talking about mental health, that is true. But a lot of times they don't look like me or talk like me, and I just can't see myself in them. So, you know, it matters from a point of layered stigma, layered discrimination, the need for representation, but it's important to have these conversations, but always have them through that lens point. So thank you for all your points. So to that point of our intersectional identities, I wanted to ask where y'all are from. What identities do you hold, and how were topics of mental health talked about when you were growing up?
Well, my identity, I come from a very, you know, white privilege, but also very Christian background, where there was a lot of violence in the household. So there was a lot of trying to understand, you know, how can this exist with these principles? Mental health wasn't discussed at all. My mother was depressed most of the time, I would say, and it trickled down to the kids. You know, it's the trauma that comes and can color things in the future.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised from Miami. My family is from Costa Rica. I am a first generation college student and a child of divorce. So I think as I think of all of those intersecting identities and where I came from, you know, we didn't really talk about mental health issues that I can remember in my family growing up. And I don't necessarily know that it was so much the stigma. I just don't think we had the language for it. I don't think, you know, we talked about like, are you okay? You seem happy, you seem sad, and addressed it in that way, but it was never something that we had like a, hey, it seems like you're really anxious. What's going on? How can we address this? How can we come together to like support you? And so as I've grown in my own understanding around mental health, it's actually really exciting for me to be able to bring that back to my family and have conversations with them about what I'm experiencing, being very open and vulnerable with them about going through therapy and what that has meant. And I think it's been really great because it's opened up dialogue for them to share what they're going through and to feel more comfortable as a family that we can talk about these things.
I love that ripple effect of hope you're starting for your family.
That's so great. I am a white lesbian, upper middle class. I'm from the Midwest originally. I'm a Gen Xer. I strongly identify with my generation and also with millennials. Probably one of the most important parts of my identity to me, which is least seen unless I make it known, is being in long-term sobriety and long-term recovery from substance use for over 10 years, and to not be ashamed to say that. The time when I was coming out in the 90s, in the early 1990s, and being in college, much different landscape in the world in terms of what kind of social opportunities queer people could access. I went to a bar. That's where I came out. That's where my friend circle was. Those were the safe spaces in Dayton, Ohio in 1992. And so I think there's a large percentage of LGBTQ people who, you know, one of the reasons substance use may be particularly high in our community is, at least up until somewhat recently, the places we had to go was filled with, you know, alcohol and drugs. And so what can we do as a community to make our events open and accessible to people who don't want to use substances, or part of their mental health care is staying away from those things? So it's kind of a little bit of a drum that I beat that I think is important.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. It's a really good point. The bars and clubs, that is a spot where LGBTQ plus people meet. I think it's why it was so tragic when the Pulse tragedy happened, because it's so deeply I traveled to Kentucky and I told a random bar manager that I was involved with the mental health response to the Pulse tragedy and that I was from Orlando. And they started crying because they knew, what that means, what having that kind of space means. But you're also right that we need sober spaces and we need to connect over things that aren't just alcohol or drugs or things that, we need more sober spaces. It's needed. So thank you for uplifting that. I wanted to transition us to something else that has been affecting, I think, most people's mental health. For those of you that don't know, we are in a pandemic on for way too long. How are y'all? Are you okay? How has the pandemic been affecting the mental health of you, or for Stephanie, for individuals that you help?
I'll let Tracy go first.
All right, Tracy, then Stephanie.
Well, as you know, I had I had a major manic episode 6 years ago, and I spent the last 6 years pretty much in a lot of isolation and shame. I had a job, was with my family, taking care of my family. They're taking care of me, but I was not well, and the pandemic has been like this strange godsend for me because of Peer Support Space with its community, digital community gatherings, and I go on the support group calls many times during the week, and I've made very, very good friends and laughed my ass off. And it's just I've also got diagnosed with diabetes, so then I started eating better, and then I started going to the gym, and basically I've selected a new church to go to, and I'm going back to chorus, or a choir. So actually, the pandemic has really been a boon for me. And I have to say that Peer Support Space, I owe a lot of it to Peer Support Space. So thank you.
Got it. Thank you, Tracy. And I'm glad I'm not the only one that's healing through humor and laughing during this time. And thanks for highlighting where it's been a silver lining for you. I think we like to give blanket statements of we're all struggling or we all want to get out there. I'm pretty introverted. I love having the excuse of, but it's a pandemic and not hanging out with anybody. I love it. But I think, I'm saying all of that to say that whatever you feel is okay. How about you, Stephanie? We said you could go next, and I jumped in.
That's quite all right. And all those feelings are okay, Yasmin. My wife is extremely introverted, and she is really thriving in this. And she's leading book studies virtually. She's reading books. She's doing all these things, and I'm like in my room, like, I miss people. I need a hug. So, all joking aside, I've really felt that deprivation of touch and missing just even client hugs. And so I'm observing all those precautions, but I didn't quite realize how much positive touch there was in my life until it went away. So for me, one of the things that the pandemic is doing is giving me very deep, real gratitude for what I didn't maybe fully appreciate before. And then in terms of coping, the only thing I know to do is just try to keep it as simple as I can. And so I make routine out of the things that bring me joy. And honestly, my favorite part of the day is a cup of coffee in the morning and like those few minutes that I get to sit and breathe by myself with the dog, and having my day bookended or at least started with that a little bit of peacefulness, that creating space for myself.
Yeah, like I can add, it's been interesting over the past few months. I work doing in-person events for a living, and that stopped happening. And so I definitely had like this period of time where I was like, I don't know who I am. Like, if this is my job, this is what I've done for 7 years, this is the work that I'm used to, and not having in-person events like Pride, that hasn't happened in Orlando, hasn't happened in Miami as well. I didn't really know how to deal with that. I think I had a little bit of leg up on the quarantine aspect of the pandemic because I've worked from home for 4 years. So it wasn't a huge transition for me to be like, oh, I can't go out. Okay, I work from home. It's fine. But definitely like recognizing the anxiety that comes with the health scare component of the pandemic, and recognizing how many people have died and how terrible that's been. I watch TV now, and it's old episodes of things, and I'm like, there's too many people in that room. I was like, somebody wear a mask, social distance, and I'm like, it's TV. This was recorded years ago. Calm down. And I still look at things like that, and I'm just like, no. So, as I think about going back into the normal world once we're, past this, like, how will I work on that, and how will I make sure that I can enter these in-person experiences, all of these things that I was used to doing before and thrived in, while also being kind of like, maybe we don't have to hug everybody we see, and that's okay.
Thank you, all of you. And for me, the pandemic was really hard for me. My home is my place of trauma, and I didn't realize how I avoided it. And I avoided being home, and being home all of the time forced me to confront my PTSD in a way that, frankly, I just didn't want to, and I wasn't ready to. And, it made me realize that feeling trapped and the unknown were also triggers for my PTSD. So it was really hard for me. And I've created a daily maintenance plan where it's literally like, all right, you wake up, you can't look at your phone until you drink a glass of water, feed the dog, water the plants. And it's just this whole page of checklists of things. And I try to get a C or above because C's get degrees, and, be compassionate with myself when I don't have good days. But I am equal parts tired of the pandemic and also terrified of transitioning back to what it was before, because I'm so used to it. But one thing that I've noticed, at least with the people that we serve, is one of the things we started doing the pandemic peer support space, took all of our resources virtual, but we also started giving out food. And one of the reasons that we did that was people sometimes need to take care of their basic needs before they can even think about something like mental health. I know, Stephanie, this is something you're passionate about. So I wanted to ask you, how do other issues like food or housing, how do those affect mental health?
Yeah, we can go back to our friend Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, that pyramid or that triangle, right? And so unless we meet those basic physiological needs, safety, security, shelter, we can't get up here to the I feel great about myself part. I read an article by a mental health professional. In fact, I think it was actually a tweet, if I'm not mistaken, and it said, I love my job helping clients, but honestly, what most of them need more than therapy is money. And I went, oh, truth, in those basic physical needs. So the shelter and food and those basic, I can function, that's necessary, but not alone sufficient. We're missing the mark on those. We're struggling here in Central Florida. I don't have to tell you all this. We've had significant layoffs of cast members from Disney, from Universal, huge representation of our LGBTQ community. So, the unemployment effects, like, how's that impacting them? And even going back to the last, kind of conversation with the pandemic part, there's a lot of grief and loss issues coming up because so many people have had loved ones die during this pandemic, robbed of the opportunity to grieve and mourn as a community the way that we normally would. So that's really hard too, right? And it's just there's so much there. There's just so much there to say.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that goes back to what we were saying before of looking at the whole person and really taking it from there. So thank you. I'm going to ask each of you one question and then all of you a question, since we're heading towards the end. And if anyone has any questions you want me to ask, I might be able to sneak in a question from the comments. Tracy, my next question is for you. What is the importance of chosen family to you?
Well, I've had a lot of loss during the pandemic. I lost my stepmother, and I've lost my father, not to COVID, just natural death. And I have my brother in Nashville, so I don't have any family here anymore. And all I can say is thank God for my peer support space people. Those are my chosen family, and the people at the gym and the people at church and that kind of thing. That's what sustains me now, and they've sustained me through a lot of loss. So thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm also really passionate about people having support systems and chosen family. My own mental health journey, or I guess the lowest part of my mental health journey was after getting out of a 5.5-year abusive relationship. And what happens in those is you're isolated. And I came out of it realizing that I didn't have friends anymore. And I experienced back-to-back trauma after that. And it was awful, and it was so hard. And the hardest part of it, more than flashbacks, more than, not being able to sleep, was just this intense feeling of isolation and being alone. And I think support is so understated when it comes to mental wellness, and an important part of our wellness journey. And I mean, the whole thing is what created Peer Support Space, right? The tagline is "We're chosen family heals together." So that people can have those support systems. A peer is not someone that's going to make the rain go away, but it's someone who is going to walk with you through that rain. And that can't be understated, not just receiving the support, but also giving it. A lot of us heal through helping. And I see people that come to get support, but they end up giving so much support. So having that sense of chosen family is just so, so important. Danny, my next question is for you. Is it selfish to practice self-care? Do you have any favorite self-care techniques?
So I'm going to say something that's probably a little controversial. It's incredibly selfish to practice self-care, and I love it. I have learned, so this past winter break was the first time that I took an extended vacation in my life, probably. I took a solid 3 weeks off from work. And because of the pandemic, I couldn't go anywhere. And I lavished in the selfishness of self-care. It was this beautiful experience where I was like, today I'm going to sleep in because I want to. And I had the opportunity. I recognized the privilege of being able to take that much vacation and being able to do that. But I was like, today I'm going to binge an entire season of the show that I've been wanting to watch for a while. I think one of the things that I picked up from there and was able to do, and I'm grateful for my co-founder Corey on this, is I integrated morning walks. So I live in Miami. I live in Miami Beach. I have access to the ocean very quickly. And there's a path. And so every morning we would get up and we'd go for a walk. And it has been so great because it has created this domino effect that starts my day in such a different way. So I wake up, I go for my walk, I come home, I take a shower, I make my bed, I eat breakfast. I'm usually playing some kind of music, and then I get settled into work. And it has created this practice that has become secondhand. And a day last week, I missed it because I was tired in the morning and my whole day was terrible. I was like, I don't have any energy. My anxiety is super high. And it was because I hadn't practiced that process that I had developed in the morning. So yes, self-care is incredibly selfish, and you should do it for yourself as often as you want.
Thank you, Danny. And totally jump into that self-care. I love that you think it's selfish, but you just don't care. I personally think we can all have our different opinions, right? I don't think it's selfish because I'm in a helping profession and I can't help other people unless I help myself. I can't show up for my friends unless I help myself. So to some degree, and I don't think I learned that until I totally crashed and burned. But I think one of the biggest takeaways that I have gotten just sitting in way too much reflection during the pandemic, like a lot of us have, is that sometimes taking a pause is progress. Like we live in this world that tells us to produce, produce, produce. And by this world, I mean America. And because of that, we feel bad when we're doing nothing. But sometimes if I were to take a break for a day, I'm going to get more done in the next 4 days than if I push through the 5 days. So for the sake of productivity, sometimes I do nothing. So I really appreciate you all highlighting, some issues in our mental health system or some things that we need to be mindful of or opportunities for growth. But I also really appreciated your messages of hope and sharing what you do when you're unwell, what self-care looks like for you, because I do want people to walk away feeling like this was a real convo, but also having a little bit of hope or just things that make them happy. But I wanted to go around and ask you all what your favorite resources are. If you want to give any shout out to local resources, bonus points if they're free and LGBTQ affirming. But I'm going to go around and feel free to plug your own practice, your own organizations. I know all of you and you come from very good places. So I'll go around. Stephanie, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll give a small plug to my own practice. I have Orange Counseling, which provides virtual services, some limited in person 1 day a week. In terms of community, I do refer a lot of my clients to Peer Support Space because that's free and virtual, easy to access. I want to name our sibling organization, Zebra Coalition, who's not here, and the tremendous work they do in the community and how many folks I refer over to them. There's something new called Transmission Ministry, and it's a collective group of transgender individuals kind of finding a footing in a faith community, and they're a little bit newer, so I want to practice sharing their name and with other people in the community. One of the things I try to do is follow people on social media who I otherwise would not. One of my favorite people to follow is a writer named Chrissy Stroop, and she is amazing. She's a trans woman. She's got a PhD, and she has so much great thought to offer on her own mental health journey, her area of expertise academically. So follow people on social media. That really makes a difference, both in terms of what you learn and supporting them in a very real way.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I love those resources, not just being direct mental health resources, but follow this person and check this out. I think all those pieces are important. So thank you for plugging those. How about you, Danny? What local resources do you want to plug?
Yeah, I think, so to Stephanie's point, social media for me has actually been really huge in how I've learned to understand a few different things. And I realized that I had not good things in my feeds often. And so I've unfollowed a lot of stuff. But I will get eye rolls from a few people that I know are watching this, but I have gotten into mental health TikTok, which is it is this free resource. There are many, many affirming cutie pock therapists on this app that are sharing what they know 60 seconds at a time. And it's just really great. And you can sit and you can listen to it. I think, I love following Peer Support Space online and all of the things that you all share. I follow a few different accounts that allow me in the spaces that I'm occupying virtually to be able to access that. I also do want to throw out locally in Miami, Miami Beach is the Douglas Garden Community Outreach Center is where I went for therapy. And it's really, really great because it's got a sliding pay scale. If you don't have insurance, they'll work with you. They've got scholarships, quote unquote. If you can't make the payment, they will lower it to what you can make. Really incredible therapist, really accessible space that I was very grateful to access.
Thank you, Danny. How about you, Tracy?
Well, first I have to say thank you to Peer Support Space. Huge influence on me in this last year. I also would recommend 211. as a resource. They can help you find counseling. They can help you just listen to you if you just need somebody to talk to. They can find queer resources for you as well. If you don't know what 211 is, it's through the United Way, Heart of Florida United Way, and it's like 911 for social services. So if you're needing help with your rent or your utilities or even medical payments, things like that, you can call them and get help. I need to also talk about the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI. They were built with families in mind. So it's mostly family members, but there are consumers, people who consume mental health services. They do support groups and incredible education programs, and also the Mental Health Association of Central Florida, an excellent resource if you're trying to find a new counselor or group counseling. You can tell them what your insurance is, and they can look them up for you. So those are. And then there's the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, DBSA. You can find them on the internet. They're also very good.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. We're so lucky to live in a place that has so many resources. And thank you for sharing a lot of those gems with us. And I've heard of all the places y'all said, except the one place in Miami-Dade, but I'm sure it's great. So do want to vouch. So those are some really awesome resources. I think we did something really important today in that we had a conversation about mental health. And that in itself can be really daunting. So I want to give us some props and some kudos for that. But I think that we can all raise awareness about mental health in different ways. So asking this openly, what are some things like people getting involved that are like, I care about mental health. Like, I don't really know how I could play a role. What are some different ways people can play a role in raising mental health awareness?
Listen.
Well played, Tracy. Well played.
That's my one word answer.
Powerful.
And that we all have mental health. Not all of us have mental illness, but we all have mental health. And we're here for each other.
Yeah. I think for me as a mental health professional, one of the things I can do is use that kind of professional privilege in a good way, right? So much of my work is validating clients saying, is it normal? I'm going through this. Your other clients having this? And I'm saying, yes, it's normal. Yes, it's normal. But not everybody gets to sit in a room and, gather that data like I do. So I'm very lucky. One of the things I can do is share I'm in recovery or that I've walked through depression in my own life. As a mental health professional, I'm not magically immune from those things just because of my, license, right? And so just to destigmatize by being visible saves lives. I hear it every day from my clients. So our existence is perfect and beautiful and awesome.
Yay, visibly sad people. How about you?
I'll take Tracy's cue from this and use my one-word answer of talk. Feel comfortable talking about mental health, and talking is in quotes and relative. So if the way that you talk about it is open dialogue in a digital space or in a community group, that's fantastic. If you do it with your best friend, that is the best way to do it. If you do it through like really positive mental health memes that you post and you can't really talk about it, but you just think this is great and you want to share it, that is the best thing. Find ways that you can access and start having these conversations with trusted people, with your chosen family, with virtual spaces, because it removes that fear, not necessarily always the stigma, but the kind of like, yeah, I guess I can talk about this. I don't think if you had come to me 2 years ago, I would have been on this conversation. It would have been way too hard for me to do it. But I've talked about it and I'm more comfortable now.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. We're at the end of our conversation. The time has flown by with y'all. I really appreciate you sharing space. Is there anything any of you really wanted to say that you didn't get to? I just want to open up the floor just in case there's something you didn't get to say. I don't want you to leave and be like, gosh darn it. Go ahead, Tracy.
I would just say, due to this pandemic, there is online help out the yazoo. So no matter what you need, no matter if, what your diagnosis is or you don't have, there's a place for you. You don't have to show your face. You don't have to speak. You can just be on a call and have community.
You heard it from Tracy themselves. There is virtual help out of the Yahoo. Stephanie, Danny, did you have any closing thoughts?
I'm just grateful for the space, for coming out with Pride, hosting a conversation like this. I think it's awesome. I can't wait to get back to Pride, and we'll deal with the anxiety about being around people because I just want to be in such a beautiful space with everybody. So I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I look forward to being with you all in person soon.
Thank you, Danny. I look forward to that too. How about you, Stephanie?
I'll just say you are loved and you are enough.
Thank you. And on that note, I thank everybody watching this evening for starting a conversation, interacting with us about mental health. And I hope you all do one nice thing for yourself because you're worth it. Bye, everybody.